Thank you for joining us again for the second roundtable of the Borders Forum. We will tinker together for the next hour and a half, a program dive into the toolbox. Cross-border territories are more and more integrated in the tools proposed by European actors, such as the Commission, the European Investment Bank, the European Cross-Border Mechanism, the InvestEU, the cross-border governance tools, how to get our hands in the dirt, how to really act for local actors. You can still ask your questions on Slido. We've had very interesting questions during the first session and roundtable. Our high-level guests are here to answer your questions. And we are with a very high-level guest today. Anne Sender, member of the European Parliament, Vice President of Demotte, is with us. Good morning. Also with us, Normunds Popens, the Deputy Director-General of DG REGIO. Thank you for being with us today. We are also with Rudy Demotte, the President of the Eurometropolis Lille-Kortrijk-Tournai. He is also the President of the French-speaking community of Belgium. Good morning. And we will also, in a moment, be joined by Claude Turmes, the Minister for Energy and Spatial Planning of Luxembourg. I see that he is taking place now. So first, Mr. Normunds Popens, the Deputy Director-General of DG REGIO, could you give us maybe what the toolbox is? Can you present it? How does it work? This toolbox with very innovative tools that were implemented by the Commission. Can you explain what are those tools and what is their purpose?
Good morning, and good morning to everybody who is listening to us in the virtual mode. I'm very happy to participate in the Borders Forum. Today, the Borders Forum was opened also by our Commissioner Ferreira, so you heard from her that obviously work on the whole package of the European territorial cooperation programs and all the issues that are related to cross-border cooperation is a big priority for our DG and for the Commission. And I think particularly in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, it was evident that even with the work that we are doing at the EU level, this is not enough. And we saw that in times of crisis, certain measures taken by member states at different levels were not very well coordinated and had a very negative impact on our cross-border areas. Of course, we were able to sort out and regulate, I think, everything in the end, but there definitely, from our point of view, there are lessons to be learned. But now focusing a little bit on what we have done and what we will continue doing in REGIO and in the Commission. Obviously, this is this toolbox. It's a creative work. It's just, I think, a number of work streams that we will be pursuing, but it hopefully will lead to concrete deliverables and concrete actions which will, have impact on cross-border areas and people living in these areas to have access to all the services, to have to cooperate really, to have access to labor markets, to health, education services, so on, but also to eliminate problems related to this cross-border cooperation in terms of business support, accessibility, transport, and so on. And obviously, the key there is to keep the political visibility of a necessity to do that. And I think this crisis showed that there is this necessity. And in this context, this forum is a very good tool. We hope that many people will listen to it, and we are happy to welcome also this declaration, and we will do, of course, everything we can to also raise this profile of cross-border cooperation, not just vis-à-vis funds, but also vis-à-vis different EU policies. At the same time, I think it's very important to recognize that we have very important funds at the EU level from EU budget supporting this cross-border cooperation under the ETC strand of the cohesion policy. And this should be one of our priorities now, because we are setting up the new financial period. I mean, the post-2020 programming is ongoing. We are engaged with many stakeholders, with our partners, managing authorities, member states, in our informal dialogue, and it also refers to all our ETC strands, strands A, B, C, D, and potentially also strand 5. Of course, we hope that the co-legislators will agree on the regulatory framework, which is going on very well. In fact, we had the last political trialogue last week, and it went very well. So we are hopeful that this time around, maybe the start and implementation of ETC programs will not be delayed for once. But okay, it requires work. We need to work together so that this financial support is well targeted, it's prioritized better, and it really also in the light of slightly reduced funding, which is inevitable because of the Brexit situation, we have to make sure that we target better this funding. And there, I'm very happy to say that also this extension to neighboring countries, particularly enlargement and neighborhood countries, is now also concentrated within one DG, which is REGIO, and this is why we will try to also make sure that these programs are better used and stimulate cooperation with our neighbors. Obviously, on the legal side, as you know probably very well by heart our communication on cross-border obstacles. We continue to support also the work on our cross-border focal point in REGIO, but I think it's very important to recognize that also our EGTCs, which is European Groupings of Territorial Cooperation, this tool has worked to a certain extent. It's been taken up, and we have about 80 EGTCs currently in EU, and we think that more are to come. And later we do celebrate 10 years of this instrument. It showed that this is very useful, and it is used for different forms of cross-border cooperation, but we want to go further. Obviously, the Commission has proposed the European cross-border mechanism as part of our regulatory framework for future. It is voluntary, it really leaves a lot of choice, but it also would create an instrument which would cover the possibility to create one legal one legal setting for this cross-border cooperation. We hope that the German presidency, together with the member states and the parliament, will also progress on this particular file, because this is part of, I think, our support to cross-border areas in the legal terms. And of course, we will keep providing technical assistance. We have online platform. Of course, we have also our Interact program, which supports the implementation of cross-border and transnational programs. But we also hope that we can find also from our technical assistance more and more tools involving use, involving concrete people, trying to understand and help everyone to come up with solutions. We have this initiative of B Solutions, where we finance 40 small initiatives which offered legal expertise to understand different problems and solutions, and we will go this way. We want to go this way. Now, just very few words on our programs, because it is important, as I said, to get it right. I was personally hoping that the member states and regions would be more inclined to do some changes in the architecture of our ETC programs and the way that we target. But okay, even if we keep more or less everything as it is in the moment, we should strive to achieve that the territories are covered. And I can assure you that all the cross-border territories will be covered in future by our programs. We will see also how to align better transnational programs and how to make them work together, because we have to make sure that if one territory is covered by many programs, that they know about each other and they ensure that there is no duplication. This is complementarity really works. And for that, we need, of course, to put some effort there. We need to be more focused, and we need to also think about this functionality principle. We are coming very straightforward in our mainstream programs through the policy objective 5, which is Europe closer to citizens, on the fact that we want to support the functional territories, this different administrative territories working together. And this functionality should be one of the key guiding principles also when we set up our support to cross-border programs. And of course, this functionality is different. If, of course, we are very much looking also at the fields such as healthcare, where we have good examples how this cross-border cooperation can happen. But also, doesn't happen automatically. It's not for granted in case of emergencies, and we need to support these joint healthcare plans. But there we need to invest also in collecting data, in identifying real needs and gaps, because only then we can really set up efficient systems, also supported by our Interreg programs for 2021-27. And again, clearly, we will not be able to build new infrastructure maybe through those programs, but they are important element to stimulate this cooperation and finance the basics of this cooperation. The same would go for external borders, of course, as I said, and we need to think about now. Very important is the complementarities. Many other funds were mentioned. We know that cross-border element exists in other EU instruments, such as Connecting Europe Facility, the Social Fund. We need to make sure that all these instruments work together. And we are very much working now with different DGs to make sure that we understand how these complementarities can be put in place. But similarly, also just within our cohesion policy, it is important to continue this work that we started on bringing together the cross-border programs and general ETCs, also transnationals, with our mainstream programs, see that they work for one purpose, and in the end that they complement each other and don't work in a separate way. This is one of our key approaches that we have tried to put forward, and we will continue doing so. And I will probably stop here because I'm sure you have questions. I will be happy to stay in the panel and answer.
Yes, thank you. This was very exhaustive, Mr. Popens. So, Deputy DG at DG REGIO, thank you. We have two guests with us, and I've been to the border with them. And I was with Anne Sanders for France 24, our TV channel, because very much interested in borders. So I went to the border to Germany in the Strasbourg area. And a few years ago, I was at the border to Luxembourg with Mr. Claude Turmes, because Luxembourg is also a country that has many borders. We are going to have a discussion with both of you and also with Mr. Rudy Demotte, who is the president of the Lille-Kortrijk-Tournai Eurometropolis. I haven't been there yet, but I will go soon. So, Mrs. Anne Sander, you're a member of the European Parliament. I also would like to remind people of the fact that you are the Vice President of MOT. Are you happy with those innovations by the EU Commission? Are you happy with those tools that are being announced, the purpose being to target cross-border regions more? There is no sound. You have to turn on your mic, please. Can you hear me now? Okay. I would like to thank MOT for this initiative, for organizing this major conference today. Obviously, we all would have much preferred to be together and see one another, but this time will come. Now, obviously, there are many issues that have to do with borders, and they are very close to my heart, I must say. This COVID crisis is an event that has shown the limits of the cross-border aspect, because borders have closed, and this was shown during the previous roundtable with all the difficulties associated with those decisions, major economic difficulties, but also the way people felt, about all this. And I'd like to insist on this, because when you're in a region like mine, that has experienced many conflicts in the past, we're also talking about a region where we have rebuilt many things, Franco-German friendship, but also other things, very important things on the wounds of the past. And when we saw that borders could close down very rapidly, almost overnight, this is something that was really striking, for the citizens. And I think we need to draw the lessons from this. What we experienced back in March should really make us move forward even faster and use the tools that are being offered to us by the EU Commission. Those tools, quite obviously, the EU Parliament is very much in favour of some of them. The Parliament has the opportunity to comment on some of those tools. The Parliament is very much in favour of cross-border cooperation. It was also what happened back in the spring. This was the Parliament who said we have to reopen the borders, you have to cooperate more, you have to coordinate the efforts. The EU Parliament also fought in order to set up the green corridors, the corridor for goods, in order to allow seasonal workers to cross the border and go and work. So the EU Parliament is, together with the EU Commission and other stakeholders, asking people to go even further. And we have one tool that is Interreg. It is very close to our heart, and the EU Parliament has asked for some additional funding, and we hope that we will be heard by the member states, because Interreg is a great program. It has limited financial resources, 3% only of the ERDF, sorry. I also would like to mention the GECT program. We have many of them in my region. I would like to refer to the GECT that includes universities from the Upper Rhine region. And this is really a great example of what can be done. I think it is indispensable, and the EU Parliament has voted in favour of this. We should move forward on those ECBM, because it's going to help us overcome the current obstacles. I also would like to mention that I have proposed a pilot project at the EU Parliament. The idea would be to carry out an experiment with a project, have specific funds devoted to that project, and prepare for the time after the crisis. With this, we would be able to provide some answers and make sure that if we were to be faced with another crisis in the future, we would be better prepared, we would have better tools, we would have a better governance in those cross-border areas with pooled and shared actions. This project has been approved by the Budget Commission at the EU Parliament, and we should vote on this during the mini session that will take place this week. And then we will have discussions during the trilogue with the Council. And I do hope that we will have enough financing for this pilot project. So we're talking about tools, dedicated tools. But, as you know, at the EU Parliament, cross-border issues are truly cross-cutting. When you talk about agriculture, there is obviously a cross-border aspect. When you talk about healthcare, same thing. When you talk about transportation, same thing. When you talk about jobs at the Employment Commission, when you talk about the regulation on the coordination of social security schemes, here again, this is a cross-border issue. But it is true that at the EU Parliament, we don't have a commission as such that deals with cross-border issues specifically. This is the reason why I have, during the previous mandate, and I will do this time again, I have been working hard in order to set up a group of EU MPs who are interested in those cross-border issues, and they are going to add those cross-border issues to the agendas of the committees where they are present. And at the EU Parliament, when we pass legislation, we have to make sure that we have this cross-border aspect in mind. We have to really realize that they will have a direct impact on those regions. We're talking about specific regions that are small model regions that are so important for the European Union now. And these cross-border issues, if they're really clearly discussed at the committees of the EU Parliament, then it's up to us all to make sure that we lobby, if you will, and that we go and talk to the other European stakeholders, the Council and the EU Commissioner. Yes, you just mentioned the Council. We have a minister with us, the Luxembourg Minister for Energy and Spatial Planning, Mr. Claude Turmes. I'd like to thank you for being with us today. I believe this was music to your ears, what you just heard, because Luxembourg is a cross-border country. You are between France, Germany, Belgium. You have 3 official languages. You are very much impacted when traffic is stopped at the border, and this is what happened during the COVID crisis. Are you happy with those proposals made by the Commission? Are you happy with those new tools? Should they go even beyond those tools, because you are an ambassador for cross-border issues? Good morning. So first, I'd like to make sure that everyone can hear me. Is the mic working? Yes, we can hear you. Okay, fine. I tend to agree with Mrs. Sander. What she said is true for regions such as Alsace, but also true for other areas such as Luxembourg. In Luxembourg, we have 200,000 cross-border workers who work in Luxembourg, and this allows for great cultural exchanges. But the crisis has also shown what kind of negative impacts we could have. Regarding the French border, everything went fine. We welcomed patients from Alsace who were really sick with COVID, and this was just normal for us because we have medical staff from the other side of the border who come and work in Luxembourg. But you can't imagine how the citizens in our region were astonished by the decision made by the German government. They simply couldn't understand what was going on. We have 60,000 German workers who were not able to go to Luxembourg. We also have Luxembourg farmers who were not able to go to Germany because they have some fields over there. And I think that many of the European spirit was destroyed during this first wave, during the first response. And I really hope that all political stakeholders understand what kind of damage occurred. And this will have to be repaired. In order to do this, we will have to make sure that we have the right instruments, we have the right toolbox. This EGTC is a great instrument. We use it in the south of Luxembourg with 4 municipalities and also Moderator on the other side of the border. We are building a cycle path, a common cycle path, also common public transport. We just launched a bid with the National Bau and Stellung in order to work on city planning and to have a common architecture in that region. We just launched, and I'm speaking as a minister in charge of energy in my country. We also launched a major process for the transition of Luxembourg. We are associating all the neighbor regions. If we want to reach a zero emission target, we will not be able to succeed if we are acting in isolation. We have to work on mobility solutions, on public transport solutions. The new Interreg program is great, even though the pre-funding are probably going to be a problem for some of these stakeholders. But I would like to really draw your attention to the fact that there are some political blockages right now at the level of the ECBM, which is the cross-border barrier mechanism. So the Commission has made a proposal. The EU Parliament welcomed the proposal, and would like to thank the people at the European Parliament who are doing this. And we are really faced with a major issue at the level of the European Council. Many countries are blocking this, and unfortunately, so what kind of countries are blocking this mechanism in your view, so that the audience can better understand what you're referring to? Well, as I was at the European Parliament for 20 years, well, you have the Nordic countries, what they say, Scandinavian countries, they say, no, we are perfect, everything's fine between our borders, and we don't need an additional European instrument. Then you have other countries in Eastern Europe, the very same countries that are not exemplary when it comes to the rule of law. And we also have at the heart of Europe, countries such as the Netherlands who are saying, well, no, we don't need any additional political instrument because of our market. And I must say that France also, I've been trying to get a clear position from the French group on ECBM. And I'm a bit surprised that I haven't received any clear position yet, because France has signed the Hagen Treaty with Germany. And in that treaty, there is a chapter about cross-border cooperation. So please, and I'm appealing to you here. We need lobbyists. We need people who are going to go to the member states, to the governments who are opposed to this instrument for various reasons. Please go and talk to them and convince them about the fact that we need that legal instrument, that legal mechanism. As with the EGTC, no, we need to have something that is flexible. No one has to use the EGTC, but if you want to do cross-border cooperation, you need to use this legal framework. And let me give you an example regarding our border. We have some wastelands between Essuazet and Oudin-le-Tiche, 2/3 in France and 1/3 in Luxembourg. This wasteland could really become the heart of a cross-border metropolis. This could really be something that would benefit thousands of European citizens. And having a common project there is something that is quite difficult because of the legal regimes that exist in both countries. So we need such legal instruments in order to build back the truth, to make sure that citizens trust Europe again. We are going to give the floor to Rudy Demotte, and then Madame Alexander, you will answer this question regarding the position of France. Rudy Demotte, you are president of the Lille-Kortrijk-Tournai Eurometropolis. You are president of the Parliament of the French-speaking community in Belgium. So, in that Eurometropolis, have you seen some blocking points that are really making things very complicated? So, what is your experience? What has your experience been during the past few months too? Please turn on your mic. You need to turn on your mic, please. Yes, very good. No. Is it working now? Yes. So I obviously agree with what has just been said, and I will not repeat it. There is one thing I'd like to really insist on. When we talk about cross-border issues, we are talking about something that is inherent to Europe. Several dozens of thousands of people live in those cross-border areas or border areas. So we could say that there are different views or different visions of Europe while we are thinking about the future of the European area. And if we look at the borders, we might say that those borders are meant to be crossed, a bit like the doors that you had at the entrance of cities in the Middle Ages. They were meant to be crossed, to enter the city. So they are areas that in Roman times allowed people to enter an area, but that would also provide a common area for those people who were within it. So now let's get back to what we are dealing with today. We're talking about 170,000 people, and they are faced with all sorts of issues on the ground on a daily basis if things start to go wrong. The two previous speakers have mentioned this concretely. As soon as you have some problems, such as a disease or pollution issues, well, then we realize that if the border is no longer porous, as it should be, but border becomes a major obstacle to a good quality of life. And what makes the stars on the European banner visible is exactly what we could do in order to improve people's daily lives. It could be a common wasteland, as was suggested by the Minister from Luxembourg. It could be a cycle path. Obviously, a cycle path at the macroscopic level might seem really a tiny effort, but really has an impact on people's lives. It could be other projects, and you just asked a question about concrete obstacles, and we have obstacles that have to do with training issues. Let's think about our own area. We have 2 countries and 3 cultures, France and Belgium, and 3 cultures. The French culture, the Dutch-speaking culture in Belgium, and the French-speaking culture in Belgium. Based on those facts, the metropolis or the regions have developed different legislations. Now, if you're a Flemish person and you want to go and work in France, and if you want to undergo a specific training, the way the training is being paid for, the way you are going to see that training, well, then you have a totally different approach, and this is true for all 3 regions of that metropolis. But in order to supersede this, you needed to build ad hoc models. What I mean by this is that you have to really clearly understand what has to do with daily issues. And together with the EU and the EU Commission, we should have maybe a pilot project, because you cannot launch a major project throughout Europe if you haven't experimented it first. But you could have a pilot project in which the people who would want to go and study on the other side of the border, well, then you will benefit from the same guarantees. For example, the fact that your diplomas will be recognized. And this was said right at the beginning. What we are experimenting in the territories should eventually lead to new legislative tools at the EU level. We should make sure that that border porosity can be translated into laws that will really apply to those territories. We are talking about things that people experience on a daily basis. If you think about the sub-region of this Lille-Kortrijk-Tournai Eurometropolis, we have 95,000 people who cross the border to go and work in the other regions. So they need common tools in order to be able to do this. And there's one last thing I'd like to say regarding the method. First, I believe that we should avoid, and this is something that we tend to do, but some citizens are very much interested in this project, and we see this on the ground. So we should really avoid using too many acronyms, concepts that are too complex. We should make sure that the common language that we speak in Europe, we have a lingua franca, so that everyone knows what we are referring to when we talk about concrete projects. For example, the KPIs. In the environment, in the healthcare sector, labor, it's difficult to compare our systems. Obviously, we could work on a model that Anglo-Saxons like to use. It's called monitoring. But monitoring tends to have a lagging effect. You have Excel spreadsheets, you have other tools, and then you act. I believe that in this case, in our case, you need to do things differently. You need to have a dynamic monitoring exercise. You need to have something that is dynamic, that evolves on a daily basis. Let me give you a more concrete example. If you have an issue with fine particulates in the Lille region, or in Kortrijk, or in the Picardy region in the north of France. So obviously, we would have to have hourly dashboards that allow us to adopt a common strategy and be extremely reactive. Now, if you think about those three borders in our Eurometropolis, when we talk about fine particles, the thresholds are not always the same. So we would really need to have a common tool that we would use in order to provide at least common answers to common issues. And citizens will have to be aware of this. There has to be full transparency regarding the data used in the dashboard. Data has to be available, and the answers provided also have to be transparent. Thank you very much for this very exhaustive analysis. We have a new guest with us. This is Michael Frehse. Good morning, Mr. Frehse. Can you hear us? I hope you can answer. I can see you on the screen at least. Can you hear us? Please turn on your mic. You are in charge of territories at the Ministry for the Interior in Germany, in charge of interior building and community. Can you hear us, Mr. Frehse? But you have to turn on your mic, please.
Yes, I can.
In which case? So the German presidency is the current presidency of the EU. It will last until the end of this year. It's a very ambitious presidency regarding those cross-border cooperation issues. How do you see things? How could we improve cross-border cooperation? And there is a great need for such cooperation. We saw this during the COVID crisis. There were many concerns in some countries with borders closing, and people are wondering about our capacity, our ability to react, to have a good management of this crisis.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction. I would like to welcome everybody in Berlin. Due to technical difficulties, I only was able to join this forum about 15 minutes ago, so please excuse my lack of involvement before. However, I would like to answer your questions. First of all, I would like to give an introductional statement. The question around borders and cross-border cooperation is one that is vital, especially in the Department of Territories here in the Federal Ministry of the Interior. I'm head of this department, and we ask questions around living realities, how we can achieve that we have these shared lived realities, not only during the German presidency, but this is a question we continuously ask. We see that in border regions, the lived realities are not the same as they are in the interior of the country, in the interior of Germany. In border regions, there is a certain aspect of isolation that comes into play, not everywhere, but in many border regions. And a lot of the time, people are doing less well in these regions than in the rest of the country. This is why we try to foster cross-border activities in general. As you know, we lie at the heart of Europe, so we have a number of neighbors that we work together with. This forum focuses on our Western European neighbors, and we have a very different relationship with Western European neighbors. We have several years of experience of shared and lived cooperation, but with our Eastern neighbors, this development has not proceeded as well. There is still some room for improvement. I think that our German perspective is very clear on this question. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, we saw that borders have a role to play, or had a role to play. Many borders fell within Europe, but new borders were erected. We shouldn't forget that. So what initiatives are there for us to implement? We want to improve cross-border cooperation. And our point of view is that initiatives should be localized. It shouldn't be Berlin or other European capitals who decide and make decisions for border regions. I think that it would be a better approach that these are local decisions made by mayors, for example, in the cities, in the regions. We've often heard the word Corona COVID crisis. This current health crisis is affecting all of our initiatives. They are hampered by the current political development. And I was able to listen in on my colleague from Luxembourg who talked about difficulties for people working across the border. So yes, there are many difficulties. We have made these new experiences, and we've seen what happens when we close the borders. I think we should try and avoid these same measures that we took in the spring. However, we saw that with our eastern neighbors, for example, Poland, what happened when you really close the border? That's what happened in March. We saw that lorries were unable to cross the border. There were traffic jams from Frankfurt until Poland. Many of our most basic needs were not able to be covered because there were shortages in many areas. I want to highlight that the question of trust is at the center of all of our measures. We should be very clear-headed about this. When it comes to questions of special measures in the times of crisis, we should be very careful. I think this was the approach that was taken, and that's all I would like to say for now.
And Sander, you were also mentioned about the question not of borders, but of the attitude of France when it comes to implementing new tools. For example, the cross-border European mechanism. So ECBM, that's how it's called, although we said we shouldn't use that type of words. So France might not be really active. You're not part of of the government of France or part of the ruling party in France. But how can you explain it? Did the crisis maybe threaten our confidence? Because Emmanuel Macron says that we should really safeguard our inner and outer borders. Maybe did something happen with this COVID crisis that maybe created a sort of distrust of borders and cross-border cooperation? Yes, as you said, I'm not a part of the ruling majority in France, and I truly regret the fact that our government and a president that really was committed in his European image, really used it for his campaign, but still today is not the head and leader of the fight for this tool that will allow us to go forward. But what I wanted to say is that France historically is a very centralized country. It is a country that is becoming increasingly centralized. And when you are in Paris, I don't want to take in broad terms, but usually in Paris, you don't understand what's happening at the border. And that's why I'm fighting for new experiments and to allow us to really go forward at the local level in cross-border cooperation. But to do that, we need a legal framework. And this legal framework, it can be given to us by Europe if member states can agree on a mechanism. I wanted to say that France signed the Treaty of Haran with Germany, and there is a chapter of this treaty on cross-border cooperation with the implementation of a committee for cross-border cooperation, and the idea is to work on these and tackle those obstacles at the border. What are those obstacles? Well, usually they are regulatory obstacles, and that's why it is very important to go forward, and I will do this. You can count on me. I will support those cross-border regions that want to go forward. The COVID crisis and its impact on borders, that's true. That's something that happened. We've seen this very clearly. And I respect the choice of states that wanted to organize more controls on the border and border checks. But obviously, countries are in charge of borders. The competency remains with them. It's something that exists in the treaty, and I respect that. But at the European level, we have to be able to go forward on the implementation of objective criteria and shared criteria for border closing and opening. It has to be a question, it has to be the case when it comes to fine particles with alert levels and thresholds, but it also has to be taken into account with the COVID crisis as well. We need to have common criteria. In that way, we'll have a smoother free mobility inside of our borders. But where we need true action at the European level, it's when it comes to controlling the outer borders of the Union. It's true when it comes to the COVID crisis, but it's also true in the normal periods, because it's important for the security of the Schengen area. It's important for controlling immigration. It's important for many things. Being inside of the EU, it's different from being outside of the EU. We need common rules, and so I'm also fighting for maintaining the control and strengthening the control of our outer borders. It's a question maybe that is philosophical, I think. The EU has a development at the regional level, at the cross-border level, but it's often accused of wanting to destroy the Europe of nation. Claude Turmes, maybe this explains why national states are really fighting against the diminution of their sovereignty in this large Europe without borders, and maybe those countries are worried about their survival when you talk about transnational questions and overcoming borders. Europe has been funded on nation states. I think, I think that you're really describing the main obstacle with the ECBM. There is this idea of a sovereign state, very sovereign, inside of a European Federation. And as Mr. Demotte said very clearly, the sovereignty at the border level between Lille-Kortrijk and Tournai, it's a question of sovereignty that is very confused when it comes to pollution, because thresholds are different in different areas. Everybody is really using its own legislation, and the fight that we have to have it will be long term. And maybe that the results of the American elections and the fact that we had 4 years of a president that wanted to build walls, and now we have someone with Joe Biden who is someone who wants to build bridges. And I think that this experience that we had with Donald Trump was something that really was a wake-up call. What is the power of Germany on the global economy? What is the power of the French economy in the world? It is limited. It is higher, of course, than the power and the strength of my government in Luxembourg. It's clear. But please, the only way for Europe to be heard with its values, democratic values, we have the continent with the best balance at the social level. We are really fighting against climate change and for the environment. But at the European level, at the level of states, we have to work better together. And that's true at the highest level of the political world, but also in day-to-day life. I campaigned for the European elections, but I can't imagine a campaign for elections at the parliament level in 6 months. How can you explain to European citizens the way that COVID was managed? If I defend the institutions, what I could say is that health is not a European competency, so it's the nation states that are responsible. But as Mr. Demotte says, we have to stop confronting the citizens and talking about our institutions. When it comes to COVID-19, we need common criteria, 3 or 4 indicators, and we need to deal with the problem together, although formally the treaties don't give the health competency to the European Commission. So maybe an answer on this important question, Mr. Popens, you were said that it was said that those new tools weren't voted, and that a number of member states are reluctant to implement them. There was a high reluctance when it comes to cross-border cooperation in some member states. Do you think that those tools will be implemented soon and will be used soon? What's your point of view?
I hope so. I do hope so. No, but let's be honest. I mean, we have been supporting at the EU level the cross-border cooperation and European territorial cooperation through our programs for many years, and we know. And what we hear today is very encouraging. But at the same time, it also shows that we need to work together better. And why? Because the cross-border programs that we fund, they can help a lot, and they have helped a lot, and because they are very local, they can be used as a trust-building programs. They can stimulate cooperation between different services on the border and provide better access for the citizens living there to health, to education, to everything. You know, we support police cooperation, hospital cooperation, all sorts of cooperation, but that is not enough. Because many of the problems linked to cross-border cooperation, they are not about local cooperation. Yes, in some parts of Europe, we still need to invest in the peace type of programs, which we do at the EU level, and this is clear. But when we talk about the problems which we saw coming out of COVID crisis, they are not local problems. They show a bit deeper problem, which is in fact that many of the areas which are very relevant for decision making and also for which have impact on cross-border are national authorities. I mean, health. EU doesn't have an authority to impose in a health-related areas EU-level legislation. That doesn't exist. And by that saying, we can do still a lot under existing treaties and under existing regulation. And this is exactly what the European Commission is trying to do. And the fact that also we did the big communication on cross-border obstacles, I think for the first time we were very honest. And we showed that there are there are hundreds of obstacles which exist at the EU level. I mean, in the EU, when we look at the cross-border areas, and most of them are linked to different responsibilities, different authorities. And of course, this is why we propose also the EGTCs and also now the cross-border mechanism. And this is why we were hoping that voluntary member states can use it, because we cannot reinforce it to member states. But it's necessary to agree once that there is a mechanism which can overcome these obstacles and put this single set of rules available to the cross-border cooperation. So I hope that, of course, it will happen.
Precisely, it is also a call for the German presidency of the European Council, the German presidency, Michael Frehse. It is reuniting in Leipzig, the Ministry for Cohesion, Territorial Cohesion, on the 1st of December to adopt a new Leipzig Charter and a new territorial agenda for Europe. And we've talked about the importance of the French-German treaty, the Treaty of Aachen, which was a leader in terms of cooperation at the borders. What is the new impulse that this treaty will give, and what will happen with this treaty?
Ja, die territoriale Agenda, die ja zum 1. Dezember 2020
Yes, the territorial agenda will be discussed in the beginning of December, on the 1st of December. It plays a vital role for our cooperation. In the beginning, I said that we have several neighboring countries in Germany, and this is why we really want to set new impulses and use this momentum, especially since Germany is not as centralized as other countries are. We have our regions, we have many different authorities that are not only focused in the capital. That is a big difference to our neighboring countries. So I want to highlight again that these lived realities that we have should be the same throughout the country, also in border regions. We want a fair Europe and a green Europe. That's something that the European Commission highlights time and again. And we are completely on board with these efforts. We try and bring about a Europe that makes it possible for its citizens to have equal chances, equal access to possibilities, while still leverage the different advantages that regions might bring about. We also want to increase cooperation in the regions, in cross-border regions, and to diminish differences and inequalities that might be the case today. This should make it possible to work together better. Our territorial agenda will then go into effect until the year 2030 and provide a legal framework that allows obstacles, that allows for us to overcome several obstacles. So this is why I'm very pleased to be part of the stakeholders at this forum and to even the way and broaden the path for our future cooperation in Europe.
There are a lot of
j'ai envie de vous préciser, monsieur Demotte, avec un fort
What I would like to do, Mr. Demotte, is to speak about the of your EGCT and asking two questions to you. A question from Jean Kessler: what do you think about the cross-border public hospital projects to face or to tackle the problem? There is one of those projects in the Gex region, this idea of cross-border hospitals, the first question, and also a close question from Vincent Millot. Can you give us a number of cooperations that you had through Interreg when it comes to health? So we're really asking a very concrete examples to better understand how all of this works during the COVID crisis.
Alors, si vous permettez, je pense que
what I would like to say, and very briefly, is I would like to talk about the people who want to defend national sovereignty and the people who want to defend the European Union competencies. And we've talked about territories, and today we have the possibility to implement tools that do not oppose national sovereignty, but actually support it. National sovereignty is threatened by globalization. There is pressure coming from the diminution of space, because regions and local authorities have more and more to do when it comes to tackling globalization. So national states are not in the same position as they were before. In 2004, I was a Minister for Health, and I dealt with the European Council on Health. And we were talking about epidemics at the time and pandemics, talking about SARS. And we thought that our national system were not enough anymore when it comes to the retroviral drugs stocks. All of the European countries were competing when it comes to price and quantities, and we didn't have a European answer to that problem. And the second thing that I want to mention is that Europe at the moment is asking itself a question. Although there isn't a health competency at the European Union, the question is how to work and cooperate between member states to create stocks when it comes to masks, for example. And there is this question at the local level from the viewers. Obviously, it's very interesting to create cross-border hospitals. And with Xavier Bertrand, who was the health minister in France, I actually signed one of the first memorandum of understanding to create a system for people going through the border for urgent situation. When there is a problem in the French-speaking Belgian part, for example, hospitals in Lille intervened and actually took the patients because we weren't able to overcome all those challenges that existed. So what will happen in the future? Well, all of this will be strengthened at the cross-border level. For example, when it comes to medical equipment, we don't, for example, need MRIs in all hospitals at the border. We don't need competition across the border when we can work together and have different health specialty in different hospitals. And so we need to have a cooperation, and we need to create new tools for cooperation. So what I'm fighting for the Europe that promotes this. And I will give you concrete examples when it comes to transport and mobility. Between France and Belgium, when you crossed the border with a train, there was a tax. It was an old tax of €5. And at the time, with Mr. Mouroy, we decided to work with the French and Belgium train companies to delete those taxis. And we also, I could talk about bike lanes, and we have the blue window in Belgium, and we can create bike lanes that are a bike lane system at the regional level, and we're doing it concretely on the ground. And that's the Europe that people want today, the Europe that they can visibly see. And Sander, there was a cross-border hospital that was mentioned, and there were questions on the health level, and there is this question of the first wave of the COVID, which really was strong in your region, and there was a lot of worry when it came to crossing the border at the time. How can we really imagine a new solidarity at the border and a new solidarity in the approach for responding to the crisis? So what I believe is that we should act on the ground. In our region, patients were transferred in Germany, in Switzerland, and this was possible because at the time there was friendship between the countries, and they were used to working together. And this is why we could really take care of those patients outside of France. And I think that's the most painful thing when the borders were closing, especially the border with Germany. Well, the painful thing is that the local authorities were not informed by German authorities, although the relationship was really good. So this friendship was painful at the time, but it was also the engine for further cooperation, and a lot of lives were saved. So you were talking about health. It is a very sensitive question because it's highly visible, and in this area, more than in others, it's difficult to understand why we can't go further and faster. So when it comes to building cross-border hospitals, of course, where it is needed, we should support those initiatives. But we also have to do everything that is possible to really mobilize medical capacity, hospital capacity that exists at the moment. And we need to really overcome all the obstacles. In my region as well, there are very long time periods for, or very long delays for different health procedures, for example, MRIs. So we need the actors to cooperate. For example, Social Security in France, the regional health agencies in France, because their vision is highly centralized and with a structure that is national, and we didn't really go as deep as possible when it comes to cross-border cooperation. So the vision exists, but the national structures have to be strengthened and improved, and this work has started, but we need to go further, and member states have to act. They have to act through bilateral relationships and reduce the pressure, because the competency is at the national level. And at the European level, we implemented a framework for healthcare at the cross-border level. But what we see is that all the patients can be cared for in the border country. There are usually problems with the insurance, and so for people, it is an obstacle, and the authorizations that are being given are usually difficult to get. I really am usually contacted by people that have problems in the border region, but also in other European countries, and those people usually they should be able to get a refund for their health costs, but it's very long and they can't do it because there is reluctance at some levels. And so the framework exists. It has to be strengthened through bilateral relationships, and this framework, it also has to be implemented, and we should communicate with the citizens so that they know the right to be cared for on the other side of the border. There are a very high number of questions, 15 questions since the beginning of our panel. Those questions, for example, they touch the regulations that are too limited. Claude Turmes, I'm going to you in Luxembourg. You talked about 200,000 workers, cross-border workers. Montpertuis asked, can we really delete the 25 square kilometers criteria in the new cooperation framework? This is a physical criteria that exists. And there is another question, the fact that 25%, there is a limit of 25% for teleworking in European regulation. Could it be higher? So those are the questions on regulation, on strict regulation at the European level for cross-border spaces. So the 25 square kilometer, it's something that is very detailed, and I could maybe come back to it and work on it with my team and give you an answer. But there's this other question, this other of telework. And during the crisis for Luxembourg, we really depended upon this kind of work. We needed to have an agreement with Berlin, with Paris, with Brussels. And there were obviously difficulties, as I said before, but there was also a common trust and friendship. And in Luxembourg, we were given a number of exceptions for this limit on telework and working from home. And there is this question, what will happen after the COVID crisis? And we'll need to work further on these limits. There is, we were talking about health before, and I want to talk about this. I was in the European Parliament when we were talking about the directive on the citizens' right to go to another country to get health care. And the problem at the time was that the hidden agenda was, it was hidden in part by the European Commission, the fact that we were dismantling public services. And some states implemented this because they didn't want their own health system threatened. And I think that it is very important that after the COVID crisis, we focus on the general interest, on public services, also inside of European law. If we want European citizens to really support all of this, we should really move from neoliberal policies that we followed for a time and really focus on general interest and public services.
So one last thing, and I'm very happy to see that there is a representative from Berlin. Berlin, the first reaction to COVID wasn't the right one. And I must really thank them for having another approach to this now. Now, regarding the ECBM, which is an important instrument that's going to allow us to create a legal framework, Peter Altmaier, the Minister for Economy in Germany, has committed to having this item on the agenda of the working group in Brussels. which means that Germany is now very much committed to help us finalize this very important instrument, or at least move forward. And I'm quite optimistic. I believe that together with France and Benelux, and maybe Mr. Demotte, well, we'll have to talk to our Dutch counterparts, because I think it would also be in their interest to have cross-border regions function better. And if everyone is willing to make this work, I'm sure we will have a legal instrument that will truly help us build cycle paths or tram routes that cross borders, or having a cross-border hospital. Because if you have the political will, but if you don't have the right legal framework, then unfortunately you will not succeed because of this lack of a legal framework. Okay, there are still other questions coming in. So this question regarding the 25 kilometers in the new European regulation. This is a question to DG REGIO, I guess. So what needs to be done in order to delete this requirement? Just a few words. We only have a few minutes left, but Mr. Popens, you have the floor, obviously. Koppen, sorry, say to speaker.
Thank you for the question. I don't think it's necessary to delete anything. We need to work on certain also rules. I mean, when we talk about the cross-border cooperations, and we use that the particular kilometers to determine the allocation for concrete cross-border programs. We have been fighting to keep all those programs in place on the argumentation they are very local, so they have to stay local in that sense. Now, when it comes to the program area and the cooperation with the regions which are around these cross-border, there is practically no limitation. So, in fact, this cooperation can take place, and there is no problem with that. But we certainly would not advise to now make calculations for these cross-border programs based on a very questionable criteria. And this is what we have been saying along. We have established a system, and we need to work on the complementarities between different instruments. We have to keep the essence of the cross-border program as it is, but then we have to make links to the mainstream programs where it's enough funding also to fund these cross-border projects if they go beyond this continuous cross-border area. And this is where we need to have a change of mentality also everywhere, also in our managing authorities which run the mainstream program, that supporting cooperation projects with other countries should become a normality. And in that context, we don't see a problem in future to fund all these projects. Thank you.
Alors, beaucoup de questions aussi pour la présidence allemande tournante de l'Union européenne.
Many questions to the German presidency also. What about pilot actions in the new territorial agenda? How can those pilot projects contribute to cross-border cooperation? And another question, it's asked in English. Is Germany going to take strong action in order to adopt this cross-border mechanism, the ECBM? So Germany as the current president of the European Union until the end of December.
Ja, danke für die Frage. Zunächst möchte ich aber noch 2, 3 Worte sagen zu Covid.
Yes, first of all, I would like to also say a few things regarding the COVID crisis. First of all, Germany welcomed several patients from its neighboring countries, from Italy, from France, from other neighboring countries. And we have decided to take and charge this treatment. So the German state pays for the treatments that these patients received. I really hope that you see how difficult a European approach to our health facilities should happen. If you have any visibility or any idea of how the German health system works, you will see that this is very complicated. It is a very intricate question, and it is impossible for me to explain the German health system to you. It is extremely complicated. There are many different facilities that work differently. We have 16 different social securities. That's just one aspect of the whole question. So asking these questions on a European level will be difficult, I think. However, in practice, we managed to work together because in the regions we had this cooperation. We had this one doctor in Strasbourg who called his colleague in Karlsruhe and asked, do you have space, do you have room for these patients? And this was how the cooperation was made possible. That's something that we should highlight and something we can be proud of. And about pilot projects, we have several of those on our agenda, and we try and implement them on many different levels. Also in France, we have a pilot project on the organization of space in the northern sphere and also in the south. We have this program in France, also around Fessenheim, where we use what used to be the nuclear power plant Fessenheim. We try and turn this area into a business and innovations park. We also have other pilot projects. You asked us to not go into detail, and that's just what I'll do.
So thank you to all our guests, and I'm waving goodbye to you. You can wave goodbye to me if you want to. This is the end of this second roundtable. That was really very interesting. There were many questions. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to read all those questions, so I apologize for this. So this was the second roundtable for this morning. We will resume at 2:30 sharp. High-level guests again. We are going to talk about European borders again. We also have the prize, the 2020 prize, the EGTC award that will be awarded. And I will let you go with a small video about the 50th anniversary of those European groupings. It is commented by Judith Varga, Hungarian Minister of Justice, and Mr. Ramirez, who is the Secretary-General of the Association of European Border Regions. So that was this video, and we will
Dear participants, the European grouping of territorial cooperation embodies core principles of European integration: respect, competitiveness, and subsidiarity. The EGTC necessitates mutual respect to trust in an organization established in another member state. It reinforces competitiveness by developing jointly peripheral regions. And in the name of subsidiarity, its objective is to facilitate cooperation between national, regional, and local governments in order to strengthen economic and social cohesion. Isn't it one of the original aims of the European Union too? The book builds on earlier works of its authors. However, by combining views from both Central and Western European countries, it manages to offer such a wide perspective of the topic as never before. Hungary is surrounded by territories with large groups of national Hungarians. Therefore, cross-border cooperation is vital for us. Internal cooperation, however, may only be possible if strong nations are capable of protecting our external borders. Each nation has a responsibility to protect the EU's borders. Only in such a secure framework may we strengthen the economic and social cohesion for which the EGTC came to being. Have a fruitful conversation.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me, ABR, to comment on this very interesting book. My name is Martin Guillermo. I'm the Secretary-General of the Association of European Border Regions. I have been invited to comment on the book 15 Years of EGTCs, Lessons Learned and Future Perspectives, which has been edited by Jura Oksai, Secretary-General of the CESCI, a very good friend and partner of our association. Well, first of all, I should say that it has been a pleasure to go through the book, and I have marked a lot of pages, I should say, to go for a deeper reading. Also, there are very interesting tables, but especially I'm very interested on the very good approach towards the future about what an instrument like EGTCs can mean for the further development of cross-border cooperation. We are in the middle of a pandemic, which in the first stage meant closing borders and stopping cross-border cooperation. But very soon, it was clear that there was an emergence of a cross-border civic society, and there are a lot of cross-border interactions within the EU, even at the external borders, but particularly within the EU. There are various millions of people who crosses the borders every day for work, for study, for whatever, and the different levels of exigence which are demanding now cross-border public services, systematization, and even the guarantees for these jobs and the businesses across the borders. They need of instruments to keep their sustainability and the guarantee of survival of some of these operations. Well, then in 2006, the EGTCs were created, the first regulation came into life, and up to now, almost 80 structures have been created, and well, with different levels of competence, let's say, of tasks, and with different type of supports, with more powerful, less powerful. But they can be seen all over Europe, and particularly in some borders anyway, where perhaps there was the instruments that were available before were not sufficient, and now it's a good time to make a review like the book is doing from different perspectives. I have found really enormous and very interesting analysis that deserve a further reading. I would like to go through some of the issues to draw your attention and perhaps to stimulate you to read the book. Well, first of all, we have a chapter where the Professor Martin Srimuski explain the institutionalization of cross-border cooperation through the EGTCs, and makes a very interesting overview on the performance, the structure, the founding procedures, etc. That could be very, very good for those who have experience already, but even for those who access to EGTCs for the first time, where they can find very, very interesting information on how to make it, how to build it, etc. Then we can see a chapter by Gyula, the editor of the book, where he's proposing to change the interpretation of the tool. He refers to the intention of the founding fathers that the EGTCs were to implement European territorial cooperation. But when we see the view from the ground, it's considered to be multi-purpose, to have an integrated action. And also they could be the representatives of cross-border areas. So at the end of the day, these 15 years of EGTC integration can be summarized in the wheels of their users, which is to have to use them for integration, for flexibility, for adaptability, and for representation. Very interesting. Professor James Scott, who is also well known in our family, talks about the role of EGTC in the institutionalization of cross-border cooperation. It's like a more sophisticated way of cooperation. And he also draws the attention that in times of crisis, populism and growing nationalism, cross-border cooperation remains a holder for the spirit of open borders and cooperation. Sarah Svensson highlights some of the major challenges for EGTCs after reviewing 3 relevant cases, and she stresses that EGTCs are not an end in themselves, but a facilitator of territorial cooperation and integration. Durand and de Copil, they are warned that EGTCs do not seem to have been used yet to their full potential in terms of cross-border integration. And there are different reasons, but they are quite critic, and then probably they touch some of the hot potatoes here. Sometimes EGTCs could be created like in an opportunistic way, just to get Interreg funding, or to secure jobs, or as a discussion forum for other issues, but not for strengthening cross-border cooperation, which is the main purpose. Perhaps here we can see a lack of political will, and the other way around. When there is political will, we can see that cross-border cooperation runs, either with EGTCs, with REGIOs, or whatever. Of course, EGTCs makes possible to do more things. Very interesting as well is Matthias Jasic's on the role of cross-border cooperation in spatial planning. Actually, everything started with cross-border, with the spatial planning, with the planners, where they said that we could not plan across European borders and to look for integration if we don't have some minimum of common standards. So very interesting to go at the very start of the issue. Professor Medeiros, Eduardo Medeiros, is another well-known researcher on cross-border issues, and he writes on the EGTCs as a tool for cross-border multi-level governance, which is also another very interesting point. They are not an El Dorado for cross-border cooperation and could be fast food EU policy tool because of their immediateness. Very interesting comment. Peter Ulrich, he writes about the power of EGTCs to provide participatory governance, analyzing 4 practical cases and announcing a deeper publication very soon. He's talking about the social dimension of EGTCs and cross-border cooperation and the relevance of the active participation of the civil society, the provision of social services, and social innovation in cross-border regions that can be implemented through the CBCs. Alice Engel writes about the perspective of minority studies, the role of minorities in cross-border cooperation. She distinguished between legal and political and socio-economic layers of cross-border cooperation in multi-ethnic and multicultural context. Jean Peroni, the director of MOT, discusses about the competences or just tasks for EGTCs, and he talks about the reactivation of this debate during the negotiation of the Aachen Treaty and the relevance at the light of the role of borders and cross-border cooperation during the present pandemic. Stelle Braat fosters spatial justice in EU borderlands, and she is explaining how former front lines have been converted into interfaces and laboratories for European integration. So good cross-border cooperation could add an enormous value and very sustainable to the EU integration process beyond borderlands. So you can see it's a lot of food for thought, a lot of very interesting readings that I would recommend to you. So I wish you to stay safe and healthy, and use the time that you have to stay at home, perhaps, to read a very good book like the one we are presented today. So I wish you a very good reading, a lot of success to Chesky with this type of publications like others they are doing, and also a very successful event today in Paris. All the best. Stay safe. Bye-bye.